Welcome. Welcome to Interreality 101. Interreality 101 is a 20-minute seminar that will introduce you to an exploratory research investigation about defining interreality. First, though, I'm Anna. I'm not actually a professor, but once upon a time I was a neuroscientist, and I worked doing medical research before I came here, which is sort of where my interest in mixed realities began. I worked on 2 VR studies with spinal cord injury patients, one about treating neuropathic pain and one about treating vestibular disorders. And what I found really fascinating about it was how we were able to evaluate these people's physical condition using a virtual space. So, back to interreality. A research investigation based on interactions occurring in interreality. So, what do I mean by interreality? An interreality is a space that lies between these 2 realities. So there's virtual reality, which you've probably heard of, it's very popular. And there's conventional reality, which is the one we're in right now. Some people call it physical reality, or material reality, or real reality. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's this one, I guess. So, interreality is the space where interactions between people in VR and those in CR can occur. VR, although popular, is still very, very new, even for the designers that are designing for it. And so my intention with this research project is to explore all the possibilities of VR before everyone jumps on the bandwagon and takes the conventional route to the future. I wanted to experiment with what else the technology could be. And there were 2 main early inspirations behind the research I'm about to present. Early in the year, for our industry project, it was a 2-week project where we partnered with Mozilla and worked with them on their social VR platform hubs. And during that time, I had an experience where there was an exercise and we were all joining a virtual room. The platform we were using called it a party. And everyone was in the party, and I was like figuring out in the menu how to get into the party, and I couldn't really figure it out. And so we were all in the same room, and I was calling out like, "Oh, like, can someone help me? I don't know how to get to the party." And like, total silence, or I mean, not silence. I heard them talking, like in conventional reality in the virtual room, but just like totally unaware. And I was like, "Can somebody tell me how to get there? How do I get to the party?" And like, it was just this complete isolation. Like I was in a separate reality. And it led me to the realization that social VR is not actually designed to be conventionally social. So my second experience was also during those 2 weeks. We were working on a project about where we could integrate VR into the design process. So we hypothesized that clustering in a virtual 3D matrix could be a useful tool to reveal insights. So to find out, we built a matrix out of a table and some yarn, and we actually like put some Post-its in it and gave it axes and tried it out, and like it was great. But essentially what we did was we prototyped a virtual experience in conventional reality, which just seemed to me like the exact inverse of how you train a surgeon or a pilot and then take those skills and transfer them into conventional reality. So it's, you know, it sort of goes both ways. So here we are with these 2 realities, where social behavior is more or less the same within each reality, but we also know that we can prototype experiences of one reality within the other. So clearly these realities are already affecting each other, but instead of having the interactions occur only within one reality, how interreality is about how we can encourage interactions between people in both realities. So my approach to tackling this issue was mostly through games. Why games? Because games feel good. So games are accessible and fun and helped to create like a safe place where you could explore new interactions and new realities. So I used these games basically as a prototyping tool to test all my hypotheses and assumptions to uncover what these interactions could be like. I did like a gazillion really lo-fi prototypes, but I will only tell you about 3. So here's my 3 hypotheses. 1, 2 people can co-embody one avatar. This was an experiment to see if we could both feel like we were inhabiting one character at the same time. So what we did was we literally tied ourselves together and tried to play a shooter game. And I thought the experience of moving together in this way might accomplish like the co-embodiment I was looking for, and it like really didn't. So yeah, it turned out that movement was like super hard to coordinate. You fall over. It was really difficult to determine who was controlling who and who was like, you kind of felt like a puppet, and you always had to have your head turned around to look at the screen if you wanted to control or see what was going on. So, hypothesis disproven. Number 2, it will be easy to trick a VR actor into running into CR obstacles. So this is a hypothesis that was inspired by true events. When I was prototyping with a friend, he was in the headset, I was like whatever on the computer, and he goes, oh, where's the controller? And I was like, oh, come and get it, it's like right over here. Not realizing I was between him and the controller, and he goes to grab for it and like bonks right into me. So we thought that was funny and tried to apply it to the framework of a game. We used monkey in the middle or like keep away. So there's one conventional reality person holding the controller and the VR headset person able to see only the representation of the controller in the virtual room has to try to get it, and you can invite as many people as you want. This one, it was like pretty easy to confuse people. It was this fun trick where it was sort of, oh yeah, that's what he's saying in there, just these like floating controllers. And he's seeing them very frantically. But there was this easy trick where you could just put it behind your back, and then all of a sudden, you know, you couldn't get it. And it was just fun to see people running into things they can't see. That one worked, proven. Number 3, VR actors will be more aware of how they move if they know they have to communicate with their bodies. This is one that we explored with Pictionary. So the idea was someone would be drawing in a VR space, and the conventional reality person is guessing what the drawing is based only on the VR actor's movements, so like charades, basically. And what I thought would happen was that most people would perform like this and use like big exaggerated movements and try to really like use their bodies within the space to communicate. But what ended up happening was a lot of this, where people drew in 2 dimensions with really fine details, and I would guess it was because being in the VR environment with the headset and the controller was still like pretty immersive and hard to kind of externalize what was going on. Yeah, so we did these hypotheses ad infinitum, and from all the learnings, I really wanted to make a workshop. So I gathered all my prototypes basically, and I wanted to create a space for people where they could create their own interreality interactions and explore new social interactions through play. So I was interested to observe how people would reinterpret the ways we were supposed to use the VR hardware. And I thought one way to do this might be to see if playing with physical toys could translate into play with physical hardware. In order to get people to prime them to think creatively about, misuse of controls, I first tried to get them to use the physical tools the wrong way. So I designed an exercise where it was 2 groups of 3, and first I told them to use the props on the table and create a game but don't use any of them the right way. So like no sword fighting with the swords, you can't blow up the balloons, don't ride the horse. And then we went into a virtual room with like, a couple of toys for inspiration. And I told them to make up another game, but this time they weren't allowed to use the VR the right way, like the controls. And so, yeah, what happened was the real toys, they didn't really matter. It didn't like so much translate the way I thought it was going to. It's, I don't know, I thought people were gonna like not wear the headset or like hold it in their toes or like weird things, but that didn't really happen. And so also the virtual objects proved completely unnecessary. They were hardly involved in the games that were made up. Also, interestingly, 3 out of 4 of the games from the workshop had somebody playing a mediation role, which was created a really interesting group dynamic. So highlight there is a game that came out of it called 1, 2, 3 Strike, which pretty much reinforced all of those learnings. And the way it works is there's 2 fighters, they're both blindfolded, each one has a controller, and then there's a mediator in VR who can see the controllers floating and has to instruct the 2 fighters where to aim, and then the game ends when the controllers collide. Whoever's like striking on that turn wins. So the game wasn't inspired by any physical object. I mean, it involved 0 virtual objects apart from the controller as a virtual object. And it implemented the mediation in a very effective way, I found. So in a lot of ways, I thought that this game represented pretty well a basic fundamental of interreality, which is use what you are given. Interreality interactions can be enhanced when you use the things that are available to you in your immediate environment. So what are those things? VR hardware and the 5 pillars of interreality. So we'll walk through them right now. First up, space. You can't have a virtual space without a conventional space. You need it to exist inside conventional space. But it's better to think of it not so much as a limitation, but an affordance. So something you can do with space, you can fill it. You could fill it with physical things like people and monkey in the middle, or you could fill it with virtual things like drawings. So what happened in Blind Pictionary when it didn't really inspire the use of space I thought it would, I tried another version. So I switched the roles, and the VR person was guessing what the CR person was drawing, but the CR person can't see the trace that they're drawing. So I thought this would get people to really use the space more freely like intended. And it turned out like sort of a little bit. Most of the drawings still ended up being in 2 dimensions though. But there was one player who used the space really effectively and kept moving around in order to find new areas to draw where he hadn't already drawn. So instead of drawing over and over your old drawing, he was just really clever about moving around. So that one didn't work out, and then here he goes finding a new spot, and then here he is again. That one's no good, so he turns around, gets over there, and then he did it again. He went there, back there, but he already is there, so he goes downstairs, and this is what it ended up looking like. So, can you guess what it is? It's a collar and tie.
What?
It's like a collar and tie. Take it off. So instead of doing what most other people did, which is sort of drawing the small pictures in front of them and like iterating more or less in the same constrained space, was he really took advantage of all the space that was available to him and used it really effectively. Second pillar, bodies. You have bodies, so instead of letting them get in the way of your interactions, you could instead think of them as huge haptic sensors to use for input and feedback. This lets them supply information about the reality that you're not in. So in this way, bodies become access points or the only windows sometimes that you get into the other reality. For example, in Monkey in the Middle, we saw this with the trick where you hide the controller behind your back. And also here in 1, 2, 3 Strike, they're trying to touch their controllers together to start the game and locate each other. But they can only position themselves in relation to each other, that they've discovered by touch, because they can't see where they are. So bodies can inform a lot, and they also inform the next pillar, which is control. So realities can more directly affect each other when there are controls divided across them. So if you think about these concepts of control, like who is controlling what information do they have to control with, this is like sort of the space where you can think about dividing the controls. For example, tied together really didn't work the first time. In the second iteration, we decided to give one person the headset and the other person the controllers, and then they sort of stood like arms through the other arms, like this. Yeah, it was fun, but it still didn't really reach the level of co-embodiment that I had expected it to. However, I had a strange experience where I was playing with someone and we were dodging a bullet in the game, and I was in the headset, and so like I leaned down to dodge the bullet, and then I felt that behind me, like he didn't follow me, and I was like, oh no, the bullet's gonna get him, which like it's not, because I had the control of like the movement that we were supposed to be co-embodying, but it was still this really strange like merged physicality in like an interreal space. Yeah, obviously aligning your bodies was like difficult. You have to have the controllers where the headset is facing, which is kind of tricky when you're watching the screen. But dividing responsibilities across realities also creates a really important thing, which is the next pillar, which is imbalances. So what I mean by imbalance is the different information that each reality provides. So when different realities are supplying different information to the interaction, people have to work together to achieve their goal. And this also opens up the opportunity for the mediator, like we saw in 1, 2, 3 Strike. So although the players are holding the controllers, it's the mediator functionally that's controlling them. But doing so by instructing the players where to go without actual knowledge of where their bodies are, only assumed knowledge from the representation of the controllers. And the players, on the other hand, only hear what she has to say. And the mediator also has the goal of colliding them. So what happens is there's all these like different sensory units that are being combined, and they have to come together to achieve the same goal, but by different means. So it requires a lot of what our next pillar takes, communication. So Interreality is a good place to explore non-typical modes of communication when certain senses are unavailable, like in the last example. So when this happens, it changes an interreality experience from an individual one to a team one, to a group experience. So our star Pictionary player, again, for example, used this moment to improvise about how to communicate. He's talking to the viewer, and saying like, yeah, okay, you're on the right track, keep going. And then he gets yelled at for playing Pictionary and not talking Inary. And he sort of has to think on his feet about how he can interact with the observer, not using body language, not using speech, but using like, the only tool he had with him, which was drawing. So it was just I thought it represented a really clever way to like think how you have to think on your feet to invent new ways to breach these realities. So here they are, the 5 pillars of interreality: space, bodies, control, imbalances, and communication. So what? I did this research for people who are invested in VR, or interested in VR, either professionally or personally. I did it for people who are developing for VR, who may want to implement these learnings, and for the people who will be affected by the implementation of these learnings. So here's what else I've done with them. I wrote a little Medium article about it. I also am working on a companion website where it will explain more than you ever wanted to know about all of those things I did, all of the experiments. In the future, I would really like to refine the workshop a bit, and it would be fun to conduct it somewhere else. And the learnings and the feedback from this talk will also be iterated again when I present them at Oculus in the new year. Thanks for showing up to class. And thanks to everybody who helped me in every and all realities.
Oh.